The girl stepped into the car dealership, dressed simply in her school uniform, quietly admiring the sharp lines of the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster. The manager eyed her from head to toe with visible disdain. "Excuse me," he sneered, pointing condescendingly toward the exit, "but I believe you've wandered into the wrong place. These cars are for customers who actually have the means, not for people window shopping." A few employees chuckled softly, and nearby customers turned curiously to look at her. Her cheeks flushed hot with embarrassment, yet she maintained her dignity, quietly walking out without saying another word. The following morning, a gleaming Rolls Royce Phantom pulled up directly in front of the dealership. As the car door opened, the manager's confident expression instantly shattered. He never could have anticipated what was coming. Morning sunlight spilled across Boston's most luxurious street, making the facade of Boston Luxury Motors dealership even shinier, even more magnificent. Exotic cars, Ferrari, Bentley, Porsche, and Lamborghini, sparkled impeccably behind massive clear windows, whispering promises of a glittering, extravagant world reserved only for the wealthy elite. Amidst this lavish backdrop, a small figure suddenly appeared at the showroom's entrance. It was Alexis Carter, a 17-year-old black schoolgirl. Her natural curly hair fell loosely upon her shoulders, and her intelligent brown eyes shone with a mix of quiet curiosity and calm resolve. Starkly contrasting the opulence around her, Alexis wore only an old-school uniform and sneakers, worn down by months of continuous use. The automatic glass doors slowly slid open as Alexis stepped inside. Soft music and subtle scents of expensive perfume filled the air. Sales associates dressed in impeccable suits immediately turned their curious gazes toward her. Wealthy clients, elegantly dressed and discussing costly automobiles, paused their conversations, carefully scrutinizing the young girl from head to toe. Blake Thompson, the dealership's most prominent sales manager, quickly noticed this unusual guest. He approached slowly, eyes full of suspicion. With years of experience, Blake firmly believed he could immediately identify serious buyers. A teen girl, plainly dressed, with unremarkable hair, and especially a black girl, could certainly never afford any vehicle here. Probably just another kid looking for Instagram photos, Blake thought dismissively, offering a mocking smile while winking subtly at a coworker nearby. Other employees exchanged amused glances, clearly enjoying the quiet mockery. Alexis quickly sensed the judgmental stares and underlying contempt from all around the showroom. Rather than succumbing to embarrassment, she quietly drew a deep breath, straightened her posture, and confidently stepped further inside, heading toward the special exhibition corner. At that precise moment, Alexis's gaze stopped in the center of the showroom, where a limited edition Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster stood proudly, gleaming. Its fiery red finish, sharp lines, and elegant curves made Alexis's heart race. She smiled faintly, picturing the proud, astonished look on her father's face when he received this extraordinary gift on his upcoming 50th birthday. Blake noticed the girl intensely gazing at the expensive supercar, confirming even further his original assumption. A black high school girl dressed too plainly surely could have nothing to do with a car worth nearly $600,000. He moved casually toward Alexis, eyes filled with ridicule, wearing a superficially courteous yet cold smile, and addressed her with practiced faux politeness. "Is there something I can help you with, young lady?" His voice, though superficially polite, barely concealed mocking undertones. Everyone else in the showroom became quiet, eagerly anticipating the scene that would surely unfold. Alexis calmly turned around, her deep, confident gaze meeting Blake's directly. She replied softly, with unwavering assurance, "Yes, sir. I'm interested in this Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster. I'd like more information about it." The instant Alexis spoke, the atmosphere turned uncomfortably silent. Now the stares directed at the girl were not merely curious, but distinctly skeptical and quietly mocking. Blake was momentarily surprised by Alexis' calm, confident demeanor, but his disdain remained, clearer and stronger than before. He chuckled softly, casting another disdainful look up and down her appearance, then spoke again with condescending authority. "This car? Do you realize it's a limited edition model priced around $600,000? Not exactly something that just anyone can easily purchase." Around them, a few soft, derisive laughs echoed through the showroom. Alexis distinctly felt the contempt hidden behind Blake's words and eyes, but she firmly refused to let this prejudice shake her resolve. With a composed smile, she replied firmly, "I understand that perfectly, sir, but I am genuinely interested, and I would like to learn more about it." Blake's lips tightened into a cold smirk, irritation flickering briefly across his eyes. His voice became icier. "Unfortunately, young lady, this particular car isn't available to you today." Alexis felt her heart tighten slightly, not from being refused, but from the sheer weight of discrimination and contempt that now pierced deeply into her heart. Yet she remained standing there, resilient and unshaken, bravely facing the curious and judgmental stares converging on her from every direction. In that exact moment, the showroom fell into a deafening silence. Every gaze remained fixed on the young girl, anticipating her next move, oblivious to the fact that this very moment would soon set in motion a dramatic, unexpected chain of events, filled with tension and emotional intensity yet to unfold. A heavy silence still lingered over the showroom as Alexis stood motionless beneath dozens of scrutinizing stares. In that brief moment, one that seemed to stretch endlessly, the young girl quietly drew a gentle breath, steadying herself and reclaiming her inherent calmness. With subtle grace, Alexis slowly turned her gaze back toward the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster, a luxurious symbol of power, wealth, and prestige. Yet for Alexis, this vehicle was simply a deeply meaningful gift meant for someone extraordinarily special in her life. Just a few steps away, Blake Thompson hadn't taken his eyes off Alexis. His mind was swirling with frustration and confusion, mingled with irritation at the girl's oddly composed reaction despite his earlier overt insult. Blake was accustomed to quickly assessing potential customers within mere seconds. In his eyes, those worthy enough to enter this glamorous world were immediately recognizable by their appearance: expensive clothes, sparkling jewelry, and most importantly, the privileged white skin tone that Blake unconsciously assumed as standard. Alexis clearly didn't match any criteria he'd ever set. Trying to mask his increasing annoyance, Blake quietly approached his closest colleague, Peter Harrington, a veteran salesperson who consistently shared Blake's sharp, judgmental views. Blake leaned in, whispering just loud enough to remain unheard by Alexis, yet clearly asserting his authority within the showroom. "Take a look, Peter. Since when did our dealership become a playground for teenage girls dreaming about things clearly beyond their reach?" Peter chuckled softly, glancing dismissively toward Alexis, his own tone equally mocking. "She's probably just here for a social media photo shoot. A Lamborghini isn't exactly a child's toy." Their quiet laughter filled the elegant space, subtle yet deliberately insulting, and Alexis was perceptive enough to recognize the underlying contempt. For a moment, her fists tightened slightly before relaxing again, reminding herself to dismiss such petty prejudices. In truth, Alexis had a very special reason for being there, a reason Blake couldn't imagine even in his wildest dreams. The Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster, a special limited edition model priced well beyond $600,000, was intended as a 50th birthday gift for her father, Marcus Carter, one of America's most renowned tech billionaires, a visionary who had built a leading global empire in renewable energy. Yet more importantly, Marcus Carter was a humble, reserved man who had always taught Alexis to live modestly and humbly, never allowing wealth to overshadow genuine human dignity. For Alexis, this gift wasn't about flaunting wealth. Her father already had everything he could possibly need. Instead, the car represented her deep gratitude, admiration, and sincere love for the extraordinary man she proudly called her father. It would surprise him because Marcus consistently refused extravagant things, encouraging Alexis instead to use money for meaningful purposes. But this time, Alexis had decided on her own. She had carefully saved funds earned through her internship, scholarships, and previous birthday gifts from her father, determined to deliver a genuinely heartwarming surprise. Clearly, Alexis envisioned Marcus Carter, a black man who had overcome countless hardships to achieve success, a man who often quietly endured social prejudice, yet firmly stood against racial injustice whenever he witnessed it. Alexis felt overwhelming pride for her father, whose quiet resilience, humility, and strength had always been her guiding star. Suddenly, a friendly voice broke through Alexis's deep thoughts. A young man in his early 20s, slightly nervous and wearing a suit slightly too large for his slim frame, approached her cautiously. "Hello, hey, my name's Daniel Miller. I'm one of the sales associates here. I noticed you seem quite interested in this Lamborghini. Can I help you with anything?" Unlike Blake's arrogant, cold demeanor, Daniel radiated sincerity and kindness. His eyes were genuine, open, and warm, his smile perhaps the only sincere thing amid this showroom full of pretension. Alexis felt her heart ease slightly. "Thank you," she responded softly. "I'd like to learn more about this Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster. I'm seriously considering purchasing it as a 50th birthday gift for my father." Alexis intentionally spoke clearly, not loudly, but distinctly enough so Blake and Peter could overhear. Blake visibly flinched, sharply glancing back at Alexis, confusion and disbelief surfacing unmistakably on his previously confident and arrogant face. Alexis met Blake's gaze again, this time with greater determination and strength. She understood well that although her father had taught her humility and modesty, he'd also taught her to speak out courageously whenever her dignity was challenged. Today, inside Boston's most exclusive car dealership, Alexis Carter decided she would no longer remain silent. She would step forward and boldly demonstrate that a person's true worth could never be measured by appearance or skin color alone. Right before Alexis, the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster still gleamed proudly. Inside her heart, a resolve just as fierce ignited. A silent confrontation had just begun, and Alexis was fully prepared for whatever was about to happen next. The tension between Alexis and Blake now stretched like an invisible thread, thin and taut, ready to snap at any moment. The instant Alexis finished speaking, Blake's expression shifted swiftly from skepticism to obvious irritation and displeasure. It seemed that her quiet confidence only intensified his anger, especially since Alexis had inadvertently revealed her plan to buy the luxurious Lamborghini as a 50th birthday gift for her father. Blake Thompson approached slowly, each heavy step echoing loudly across the polished marble floor, shattering the silence. Wearing a cold, sardonic smile, he interrupted the conversation between Daniel and Alexis with an unmistakably mocking tone. "A birthday gift, huh? Quite a bold idea, miss?" He intentionally let his words trail off, forcing Alexis to fill in the blank herself, as if emphasizing that to Blake she remained completely anonymous and insignificant. Alexis clearly sensed his provocation, yet she replied as calmly and courteously as possible. Alexis Carter. My father is someone very important to me, and this is a special gift for him. I believe the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster would be perfect. Blake nodded slowly, feigning admiration, though his cold eyes conveyed an entirely different message. Oh, of course, Miss Carter. I'm sure your father is wonderful. Unfortunately, this particular vehicle is reserved for genuinely serious customers. He emphasized each word deliberately, making his hidden meaning abundantly clear to everyone listening. Alexis fully understood Blake's intention. To him, a simply dressed black teenage girl certainly couldn't qualify as a serious customer. Alexis drew a quiet breath, struggling to keep anger from shaking her voice. I assure you, Mr. Thompson, I'm entirely serious. I'd appreciate learning more about this car, its features, interior customization options, and estimated delivery time frame. Blake stared at Alexis for a moment, then unexpectedly let out a soft, mocking laugh, shaking his head slowly. My dear Miss Carter, perhaps you'd find your time better spent looking at models more suitable for someone in your circumstances. Maybe a Toyota or Honda. The Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster isn't a car just anyone can afford to dream about. His cold and openly insulting remark instantly thickened the air inside the showroom. Several wealthy customers nearby turned curiously, watching to see how the young girl would handle such open disrespect. In the corner, Daniel frowned uncomfortably, about to speak up, but Blake quickly shot him a harsh, authoritative glare. Daniel, I believe you have work elsewhere? Understanding Blake's silent warning, Daniel reluctantly lowered his head, stepping back with visible frustration, powerless to intervene further. Alexis, standing alone at the center of attention, fought to keep her gaze steady. Her heart raced angrily, yet her father's lessons on maintaining composure in the face of injustice echoed powerfully in her mind. She answered gently yet with firm determination. I didn't come here to argue about my financial status, Mr. Thompson. I'm simply asking you to provide detailed information on this Lamborghini. It's the basic right of a customer. Blake was momentarily taken aback by her sudden resolve, but quickly regained his usual arrogance. Tilting his head slightly, he met her eyes with a condescending challenge. A customer? You genuinely think you're a customer here, Alexis. Allow me to make this perfectly clear. That car is reserved strictly for clients who truly match its value and status. I'm afraid you're gravely mistaken about your position here. The showroom froze, silent and tense. Every eye fixated upon Alexis, awaiting her response to this openly harsh insult. Some customers smiled subtly, entertained by the unfolding drama. Alexis keenly felt the injustice and prejudice embedded within each gaze, each quiet laugh echoing softly around her. The young girl gently bit her lower lip, her hand briefly clenched into a tight fist before slowly relaxing. She looked directly into Blake's eyes without flinching, her voice calm and polite. I understand your implication perfectly, Mr. Thompson, but I also know exactly who I am and where I stand. Once again, I'm asking you to respect my rights as a customer, regardless of what you believe about my financial capability. Blake hesitated slightly, momentarily stunned by her unexpected strength, but swiftly his arrogance surged even more powerfully. He smiled coldly, lowering his voice to a sharper, icier tone. Respect? I'm under no obligation to respect someone who walks into my dealership merely to pretend she's capable of affording something clearly beyond her reach. It'd be best if you leave now, Alexis, before things become even more uncomfortable." Alexis stared silently at Blake. She knew this confrontation had only just begun. She understood something crucial. Blake Thompson had made a grave mistake. Not only had he seriously misjudged her, but he'd openly insulted the dignity of a real customer. Alexis gave a subtle nod, saying nothing further. Yet deep inside, her resolve to prove herself and to ensure that the arrogant man standing before her paid a high price for his prejudice was stronger and clearer than ever. The moment Alexis silently stood her ground in the face of Blake's insult, the showroom atmosphere suddenly became charged with an intense tension. Blake Thompson, feeling as though he had gained the upper hand, smiled smugly and slowly stepped out into the middle of the showroom, deliberately raising his voice to ensure that all those present would hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in a high-pitched tone, his mocking smile still evident, "I apologize if the presence of certain individuals makes you uncomfortable. But clearly, at Boston Luxury Motors, we aim to serve only those customers who truly match the level of class and financial capacity required." Blake turned his gaze back to Alexis with contempt, intentionally lowering his voice just enough to make sure everyone could still hear. "As for you, Alexis Carter, I think you should be more honest with yourself. This is a Lamborghini showroom, not a budget car dealership. If you're truly in need of a car, I can point you toward a few affordable dealerships nearby. They'll definitely be more in line with your budget." Snickers and judging stares immediately surrounded Alexis like sharp arrows, making her feel as though she had been thrust onto the worst stage imaginable, where she was the center of public mockery and disdain. The curious glances and the smirking smiles only made her heart race faster, but Alexis fought to maintain her composure, though her hands trembled slightly with helplessness. In the back, Daniel Miller stood frozen, his face flushed with anger at Blake's brazen and offensive behavior. He knew full well that this was an act of blatant discrimination, contrary to all moral standards and professional ethics. Daniel wanted to step up to protect Alexis, but his legs felt frozen in place. Blake was the lead manager, the highest authority in the room, and Daniel knew the consequences of speaking out at that moment. Blake was far from finished. He continued moving closer to Alexis, his cold eyes locked on her as she stood still in the middle of the showroom. His voice softened but dripped with venom, enough to puncture Alexis's self-esteem with every word. "I think you know, Alexis, that this is not a place for pipe dreams. Surely your father wouldn't want you to be embarrassed further in a place like this. Don't make things harder for yourself. Just walk out the way you came in. Simple and easy." Alexis closed her eyes for a brief moment, struggling to hold back the tears that threatened to spill from the shame Blake had so deliberately inflicted upon her. Deep inside, she could hear the warm, steadfast voice of her father, Marcus Carter, reminding her of the true values he had always taught her, that a person's dignity cannot be judged by appearance or societal prejudice. Alexis took a deep breath, stood tall, and met Blake's eyes with a gaze full of pride. "Mr. Thompson, what you just said reflects on you, not on me. But don't worry, I'll remember every word you said today." Her soft, yet powerful words caused Blake to falter for a second, but he quickly regained his smug demeanor and let out a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, well then. I'm honored to have made such a deep impression on your memory, Alexis." Laughter from a few other customers echoed once again, making Alexis feel even more suffocated by the humiliation. Slowly, she turned and began walking toward the showroom's exit, each step weighed down by the deep insult and pain. In that moment, Alexis's eyes accidentally met Daniel's. For a brief second, she saw the empathy and unspoken shame in the young man's eyes. Daniel wanted to speak up, to apologize to her on behalf of the whole showroom, but he couldn't. He lowered his head, avoiding Alexis's gaze, blaming himself for being too weak and lacking the courage to protect the young girl from the blatant injustice. Blake stood in the middle of the showroom, watching Alexis leave with satisfaction, as if he had just completed some grand task. Little did he know, he had just planted a dangerous seed, the seed of retribution and deep regret that would sprout in the future. As for Alexis, walking out under the curious and contemptuous gazes of those around her, she silently vowed that this was only the beginning of a long fight, and she would never back down. The glass door closed behind her, and sunlight shone on Alexis's determined face. The young girl clenched her fist tightly and walked forward with strength, carrying with her the resolve not only to prove how wrong Blake Thompson was, but also to assert her true dignity in the face of societal prejudice. Inside the showroom, Blake and the others who'd mocked Alexis had no idea that they had unwittingly set in motion a chain of events that would completely upend their lives and positions, and the one who would make them realize their mistake was the very young black girl they had just publicly insulted. The showroom's glass door closed behind Alexis, the faint chuckles and contemptuous looks gradually fading away, but the sting of humiliation still lingered, like a deep wound in the young girl's heart. She paused for a moment on the sidewalk, the morning sun shining brightly, but not enough to warm the pain Blake Thompson had just planted in her heart. Her footsteps began to slow as she made her way toward her humble car, a well-worn sedan her father had gifted her when she was old enough to drive. Alexis tried to take a deep breath to calm herself, but tears still fell, gently tracing her cheeks. The young girl felt both sorrow and anger at the blatant discrimination and disdain she had just endured. "It's okay, Alexis. It's just a car dealership," she whispered to herself, but her trembling voice couldn't hide the pain rising within her. Gripping the steering wheel tightly on her way home, Alexis thought of her father, Marcus Carter, the extraordinary black man who had overcome countless obstacles to build a powerful tech empire. He had always told her that the road to success was filled with challenges, but Alexis never imagined that she would have to face such bitter discrimination in the 21st century. As Alexis walked through the gate of the private mansion where she had grown up, surrounded by love and careful guidance, she felt a mix of comfort and a sharp pang in her heart. Marcus was sitting in the living room, reading a book as he usually did, but he immediately looked up when he heard Alexis' footsteps. "Alexis, you're home?" Marcus asked gently, but quickly realized something was wrong from the expression on her face. He put his book down, his gaze full of concern and worry, and hurried over to her. "What happened, sweetheart?" he asked. Alexis couldn't respond immediately. She stood there, her shoulders trembling, trying to swallow her tears but failing. The feelings of shame and anger exploded within her, and Alexis rushed into her father's arms, crying uncontrollably like a child. Marcus gently stroked her hair, silently waiting for her to calm down. Bit by bit, Alexis recounted the painful story she had just experienced at Boston Luxury Motors, about Blake Thompson, the insults, the contemptuous looks, and the mocking laughter she had to endure simply because she was a black girl dressed plainly, walking into a place they thought she didn't belong. Marcus sat in silence, his eyes briefly flashing with anger, but quickly becoming deep and calm. As someone who had lived through many hardships, he understood the deep pain his daughter was suffering. But he also knew this was an opportunity for Alexis to grow stronger and for society to learn a valuable lesson. He gently wiped away the remaining tears from Alexis's cheek and looked into her eyes with seriousness, yet tenderness. "Alexis, my daughter, today you've been through something incredibly painful. But I want you to remember, your true worth is never determined by others, no matter how rich, powerful, or arrogant they are. True value lies in character, integrity, and how we treat the people around us." Alexis looked at her father, nodding in trust, but her eyes still carried a hint of doubt. "I know that, Dad, but I don't want to just let this slide. I want people like Blake Thompson to realize their mistakes." Marcus smiled gently, placing his large, strong hand on her shoulder, his voice calm yet determined. "I understand, sweetheart, and I agree with you. But we won't seek revenge. We'll make them learn a real lesson, a lesson about respect and humility. This is our opportunity to teach people like Blake that discrimination and prejudice will only lead to failure and shame." He paused for a moment, his gaze thoughtful, then continued with an even firmer tone. "You did very well standing up for your dignity today. But now, let me help you with the rest. Not just for us, but for all those who have suffered from this unreasonable discrimination. Blake and people like him need to understand that behind simplicity lies a dignity and true worth that no money or power can measure." Alexis silently nodded, her heart suddenly feeling stronger, lighter, reassured by her unwavering trust in her father. Marcus Carter always knew how to turn pain and injustice into valuable lessons, not just for Alexis, but for society at large. He pulled Alexis into his embrace once more, then looked out the window, his gaze sharp but full of resolve. Alexis knew that when her father made up his mind, he would see it through to the end. And right then, in the spacious living room, amidst the silence, a plan began to take shape. Not a simple revenge plot, but a small revolution aimed at changing the way people like Blake Thompson viewed the world around them. The next morning, the atmosphere at Boston Luxury Motors was as lively and bustling as usual. Blake Thompson had just finished brewing his favorite espresso and sat down at his desk, savoring the feeling of triumph after handling the young girl the previous day. To him, that incident had been a small amusement, a way to assert his authority at the dealership. But just as Blake was about to take a sip of his coffee, the deep, rumbling sound of a V12 engine echoed from afar, reverberating through the showroom windows. The powerful engine noise made the entire dealership fall silent. A special edition black Rolls Royce Phantom, with its glossy paint gleaming like the surface of a deep lake, slowly rolled to a stop in front of the entrance, exuding an undeniable sense of power. Blake immediately set his coffee down and stood up instinctively. His heart raced, and his eyes gleamed with eager curiosity as he saw the car. He knew its value. A supercar worth over $1 million, something only the most powerful customers could afford. Richard Mason, the dealership owner, also quickly stepped out from his office, his face immediately lighting up with excitement as he prepared to greet the distinguished guest. He patted Blake on the shoulder and whispered enthusiastically, "Blake, we've got a big fish today. There are only a few of these phantom cars in the world. Let's make sure we do this right." Blake nodded confidently, adjusted his tie, and quickly walked toward the front door. He and Richard Mason headed outside to greet the guest, their postures proud and respectful, ready to accommodate any request from the powerful man seated inside the expensive Rolls Royce. The Phantom's door opened slowly, and Marcus Carter, a distinguished black man in a perfectly tailored gray suit, stepped out of the car with measured grace. His sharp gaze and calm but commanding demeanor radiated an aura of power that only those truly at the top could possess. Blake, not yet recognizing the man before him, immediately approached with his usual friendly smile, speaking in a courteous yet slightly ingratiating tone. "Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors. I'm Blake Thompson, the sales manager here. It's a great honor to have you with us today." Richard Mason quickly followed suit. "I'm Richard Mason, the owner of this dealership. It's a privilege to have you visit us. We'll be happy to fulfill any requests you have." Marcus calmly looked at the two men, eagerly awaiting his attention, his face giving nothing away but his cold, sharp eyes. He paused for a moment as though to prolong the suspense before speaking in a deep, powerful voice. "Gentlemen, my name is Marcus Carter." The moment the name left his lips, Blake's face turned pale. The coffee he had just drunk now tasted bitter on his tongue. Richard Mason froze for a moment, puzzled, trying to remember why that name sounded so familiar. "Marcus Carter? The tech billionaire?" Richard muttered in surprise, his eyes darting to Blake, a mix of confusion and anxiety rising within him. Blake tried to maintain his composure, but inside, a clear sense of unease began to settle. He forced a stiff smile, attempting to mask his discomfort. "It's truly an honor, Mr. Carter. May I ask what brought you to us on this fine morning?" Marcus Carter met Blake's eyes with an even deeper, colder stare. He slowly walked past Blake, scanning the showroom with a casual glance before responding, his words dripping with meaning. "I'm here because of an unfortunate incident that occurred yesterday. A very important person in my life visited this place, but unfortunately, she did not receive the reception she deserved." Marcus's words cut into Blake like a sharp blade. He jolted, his heart racing, a bad feeling spreading through him. Blake tried to stay calm, stammering the question, "Mr. Carter, may I ask who this person you're referring to is?" Marcus Carter stopped in his tracks, turning to face Blake directly. His eyes were as sharp and cold as ever. "The person I'm referring to is my daughter, Alexis Carter, a simple black girl who you refused to serve, mocked, and publicly insulted simply because of her skin color and appearance." The showroom fell into a deep, paralyzing silence. Richard Mason stood frozen, staring at Blake in shock and fury. Blake remained rooted to the spot, his blood feeling like it had frozen in his veins. Every word Marcus had just spoken was like a heavy blow, leaving him unable to react. Marcus continued to walk deeper into the showroom, his voice echoing with power and coldness. "I'm not here to buy a car today. I'm here to settle a few matters with you, and I think you're all very aware that you've made a very serious mistake." Blake Thompson stood motionless, his mind reeling as he realized that the powerful man who had stepped out of the Rolls Royce Phantom was not the VIP he had been expecting, but the very disaster he had never seen coming. In that moment, Blake understood fully. All the arrogance, the disdain, and the prejudice he had displayed the day before had now turned into a nightmare from which he would not easily escape. Marcus Carter's cold words had barely finished when the once bustling showroom fell into an eerie silence, so profound that Blake Thompson could hear his own heart racing wildly in his chest. He stood frozen, his face going from smug self-assurance to pale, as if someone had drained the life out of him. "Mr. Carter, I think there's been some unfortunate misunderstanding here," Blake stammered, his voice once confident and arrogant, now trembling and devoid of its usual force. Marcus looked at Blake with an icy, unsettling calmness. "Misunderstanding? I'm afraid there's no misunderstanding here, Mr. Thompson. I was quite clear. Alexis Carter, the girl you openly insulted, mocked, and refused to serve yesterday, is my daughter." Blake immediately reached up to adjust his tie in an instinctive motion, though his trembling hands betrayed him. He glanced at Richard Mason, silently begging for help, but the dealership owner was now just as stunned, unsure of how to proceed. "Mr. Carter, I honestly didn't know she was your daughter," Blake continued weakly. "Had I known, I would never have acted that way. I'm sure this was just an unfortunate accident, a misunderstanding." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his eyes piercing through Blake as if seeing into his very soul. "Oh, I understand now. So, if she weren't my daughter and just another ordinary black girl, you'd still treat her the same way, wouldn't you, Mr. Thompson?" Marcus's sharp question left Blake speechless. He tried to open his mouth, but no words came out to defend his actions. Marcus Carter was systematically exposing the brutal truth about who Blake really was, a man hiding his discriminatory nature behind a polished exterior. In the tense silence that followed, a young voice suddenly spoke from behind Marcus. "Mr. Carter is absolutely right." All eyes immediately turned toward the speaker. It was Daniel Miller, the young salesman who had always kept his silence under Blake Thompson's authority. Daniel's face was flushed with tension, but his eyes were full of courage and resolve. He stepped forward, moving closer to Marcus, took a deep breath, and continued. "I'm Daniel Miller, a salesman here, and I can confirm everything Mr. Carter just said is the truth. Yesterday, Blake Thompson openly insulted and refused to serve Alexis Carter simply because of her modest appearance and the color of her skin." Blake spun around, his eyes flashing with rage as he glared at Daniel, his teeth gritting as he hissed a warning. "Daniel, shut up! Do you know what you're doing?" Daniel stared straight into Blake's eyes, no longer intimidated or fearful of the powerful manager. His voice became clearer, stronger. "I know exactly what I'm doing, Mr. Thompson. I'm telling the truth. Mr. Carter needs to know that Alexis was kind and polite, but you deliberately humiliated her in front of many people just because she didn't meet your luxury customer standards." Daniel's words exploded like a bomb in the showroom, leaving everyone around them breathless. Richard Mason stepped back a few paces, his face drained of color, realizing he had become an unwilling witness to a serious crisis. Marcus turned to look at Daniel, his expression softening slightly, a trace of appreciation for the young man's courage. "Thank you, Daniel, for your honesty and bravery. I know it's not easy for everyone to do what you've done." Then Marcus turned his sharp gaze back to Blake, who now seemed utterly powerless to regain control of the situation. Marcus spoke again, his voice still calm but colder and more decisive than ever. "Mr. Thompson, I didn't come here today just to demand an apology. I want you and Boston Luxury Motors to understand that any form of discrimination, no matter how small, comes with consequences. You need to realize that you've made a grave mistake, and I will ensure that you will never be able to repeat this behavior to anyone again." Blake stood frozen, his face pale, his lips moving as if trying to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, he felt the collapse of his pride, as all the biases and power he had relied on were laid bare and became meaningless in the face of true integrity and truth. Marcus quietly surveyed the showroom one last time, where everyone was witnessing this pivotal moment. He understood that this was just the beginning, a necessary beginning to change the mindset of those who believed they were superior to others, like Blake Thompson. And as Marcus turned to walk back toward the Rolls Royce Phantom, Blake knew that the life and career he had once proudly built on prejudice and arrogance had begun to fracture, irreparably, from this very moment. Marcus Carter had just turned and taken a few steps toward the Rolls Royce when he suddenly stopped, as if he had just thought of something important. The showroom remained heavy with silence, broken only by the faint sound of breaths and the rapid heartbeat of Blake Thompson. Marcus slowly turned around, his stern gaze locking once again on Blake and Richard Mason, the dealership owner, who now stood with none of the confident air they had moments before. "I thought I could walk away, but no," Marcus said decisively, his deep voice resonating with power and authority. "I won't leave until I'm sure that what happened yesterday will never happen again to anyone else." Richard Mason, as though snapping out of his initial shock, quickly approached, attempting to regain his polite demeanor, speaking in a hesitant tone. "Mr. Carter, I deeply apologize for what happened. We will make sure to address this issue in the most serious way possible." Marcus coldly cut him off immediately. "Mr. Mason, empty apologies are no longer enough. You need to understand this isn't just about your pride or your business. This is about humanity, about how you treat people." Marcus's gaze shifted to Blake, who still stood motionless, his face pale from embarrassment and fear. His voice grew even more severe. "Mr. Thompson, the discriminatory and condescending attitude you directed toward Alexis, my daughter, is not just a personal mistake. It represents everything wrong that society needs to eradicate immediately. I want you, along with Mr. Mason, to take full responsibility for your actions and your attitudes." Blake tried to say something in his defense, but Marcus quickly raised his hand to silence him. "I don't want to hear any more excuses. Now is the time for you to act, to prove through your actions that you truly understand the grave mistake you just made." Richard Mason, trying to remain composed, spoke quietly with a cautious tone. "Mr. Carter, so what exactly would you like us to do?" Marcus looked Richard squarely in the eye, his voice clear and firm, like a fair verdict just being handed down. "Effective immediately, this showroom must change its customer treatment policies. There can be no more discrimination based on appearance or skin color. But more importantly, I want both of you, Blake Thompson and Richard Mason, to volunteer directly at the charity I run, the Carter Foundation, which supports underprivileged children and those in difficult circumstances." Blake flinched, his face betraying shock. He was accustomed to a life of luxury and ease, and had never imagined stepping foot in such places. He stammered weakly, "Mr. Carter, I don't think it's necessary to go that far. I'll make changes." Marcus interrupted him with a stern glance, and a voice that was as firm as it was frightening. "Mr. Thompson, this is not a request you can refuse. This is an opportunity for you to directly witness the consequences of a society still plagued by prejudice and injustice. You need to understand what respect and compassion really mean, and that human dignity cannot be measured by money or appearance." Daniel Miller, who had been standing nearby, silently absorbed every word Marcus spoke. A sense of relief and admiration filled him as he watched Marcus Carter confront this injustice with an unusual blend of tolerance and firmness. Marcus took a step forward, looking once more at Blake and Richard, his voice softened but still powerful. "You two will spend the next 2 weeks each day at my charity center serving and assisting children who have suffered from prejudice and injustice. I believe that experience will be the most profound lesson you've ever received in your life." Richard Mason, now fully aware that there was no avoiding the consequences, lowered his head in painful acceptance. We will follow your request, Mr. Carter." Blake stood by silently, feeling helpless for the first time. For the first time, he understood that the power and social status he had relied on were now meaningless. Blake realized that Marcus Carter not only wanted him to feel ashamed, but also wanted him to truly understand the gravity of his own mistakes. Marcus nodded with quiet satisfaction, then turned and walked toward the Rolls Royce Phantom. Before leaving, he paused for a moment, turned back to look at the 2 men still standing frozen behind him. "Remember, Compassion and respect are the highest measures of a person's worth, and I hope you two will truly learn that." Marcus's car quietly drove away from the showroom, leaving Blake Thompson and Richard Mason standing in the vast space, now filled with a sense of shame, confusion, and turmoil. Both men knew well that the bitter lesson Marcus had just taught them would not be easily overcome, but it would undoubtedly change their lives forever. The first morning at the Carter Foundation's Charity Center took place under a clear blue sky, but Blake Thompson's mood was the complete opposite. He stood at the entrance, arms crossed over his chest, his face tense, full of reluctance and dissatisfaction. This was not where he belonged, Blake muttered to himself in a voice full of frustration. Richard Mason stood nearby, his expression still awkward, but somewhat resigned. When the center's director, a middle-aged woman named Linda Harris, came over to greet them, Richard tried to be polite, while Blake only gave a cold nod, not bothering to make eye contact with her. "Hello, gentlemen. I'm Linda Harris, the manager here. Mr. Carter mentioned that you will be joining us for the next 2 weeks," Linda said gently, her tone warm and sincere. Blake sighed in frustration, smirking sarcastically, then muttered just loud enough for Richard to hear, "This is ridiculous. I'm being forced to work in a place like this because of some little girl who likes to make a big deal out of things." Richard turned to Blake with an uncomfortable look, but he didn't dare argue. He knew Blake felt deeply offended, but Richard also understood that it was their own arrogance and prejudice that had led to this situation. Blake reluctantly followed Linda inside. The center's room was simple, clean, but completely different from the luxury and opulence Blake was used to. Children of all ages, mostly black, were happily playing or participating in educational activities. Blake glanced around, his face growing more annoyed and irritated. "You can start by helping the kids with their homework or assisting in meal preparations," Linda suggested softly. Blake immediately objected, his tone full of disdain. "I'm sorry, but I didn't come here to do menial tasks. I'm not a babysitter." Linda paused for a moment, surprised by the cold attitude, but quickly regained her composure. "Mr. Thompson, I think you understand why you're here. If you truly want to change something about your perspective, you have to engage in these activities." Blake turned his face away, gritting his teeth, trying to contain the anger rising inside him. He felt deeply insulted, his pride and arrogance making him resist. "I don't need anyone here to teach me about compassion or respect. I know exactly who I am, and I'm not some evil person who should be forced to do this." Blake's loud, angry outburst attracted the attention of the entire room. A few children turned to look at him, their innocent eyes wide with surprise. Linda took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and said gently but firmly, "Mr. Thompson, I'm not here to argue with you, but if you continue with this attitude, I'll have no choice but to report this to Mr. Carter. This is not the place for you to display arrogance or resentment." Blake froze, suddenly remembering Marcus Carter's stern warning. He scowled, angry, but now hesitant to respond any further. With a grim expression, he sulkily walked over to a corner of the room and sat down on a small chair. He deliberately crossed his arms, clearly showing his defiance by refusing to participate in any activities. Richard, standing not far off, silently observed Blake, feeling a mix of pity and disappointment. He began to accept the reality of the situation, quietly moving toward a group of children and carefully helping them with their homework. Meanwhile, Blake stubbornly stayed in his seat, glaring at the clock repeatedly, telling himself he wouldn't give in that easily. But just then, an 8-year-old black boy, with bright, curious eyes, approached Blake and shyly asked, "What's your name, sir?" Blake paused slightly but maintained his cold demeanor, replying curtly, Blake. The boy didn't give up, continuing with a sincere, innocent smile. My name's Thomas. I heard you're here to help us, right? Blake was about to say something snarky, but Thomas's genuine gaze made him momentarily speechless. For the first time that day, Blake felt embarrassed and a little self-conscious in the face of that innocent look. But his ingrained arrogance took over. He turned away, his voice softer but still full of irritation. You think I actually want to be here? Thomas seemed a bit surprised, but still smiled warmly. I think you're just not used to it yet. We all have a lot of fun here, and you'll get used to it too. Blake stayed silent, his emotions torn between confusion and frustration. He knew he was deliberately showing resistance to protect his wounded ego, but the boy's clear voice and sincere eyes made him feel slightly ashamed. Blake sat there, trying to push against the conflicting emotions stirring inside him. He told himself he wouldn't give in easily, that he wouldn't change for the things Marcus Carter had forced him to experience. But deep down, Blake began to realize, perhaps, just perhaps, he had been wrong, and that this bitter lesson had only just begun. On the third day at the Carter Foundation, Blake Thompson still hadn't fully adapted, but the challenging attitude he initially had started to soften somewhat, replaced by a quiet curiosity about the lives of the children around him. Among the simple bustle of the center, Blake began to pay more attention to Thomas, the 8-year-old black boy he had met on his first day. Thomas was always seen with a bright smile on his face, even though he lived in obvious poverty. A faded shirt, worn-out jeans with frayed cuffs, and old, dusty sneakers. Blake noticed that Thomas never complained about anything. He was always eager to help the other kids, as if his difficult and deprived life could not affect his inherent optimism. One afternoon, as Blake reluctantly helped prepare a snack, he suddenly saw Thomas sitting alone by the window, carefully repairing his old, tattered backpack with a roll of tape. There was something in this simple scene that made Blake unable to look away. A strange feeling compelled him to approach the boy. "Why don't you get a new backpack?" Blake asked suddenly, trying to keep his voice casual, though a hint of concern appeared in his eyes. Thomas looked up and flashed his usual friendly smile. "This backpack was a gift from my mom before she passed away. I want to keep it for as long as I can because every time I see it, I feel like my mom is still with me." Blake's throat tightened, as if an invisible force had struck a weak spot in his heart. For the first time in many years of living with coldness, arrogance, and disdain toward others, Blake felt the sincerity and value of a pure emotion like that. He looked deeply into Thomas's eyes, trying to say something but only managing to ask a hesitant question. "Don't you ever feel sad or angry that life is unfair to you?" Thomas tilted his head, thought for a moment, then answered gently, "Sometimes I do feel sad, sir, but my mom used to say that life doesn't choose whether we're rich or poor, but we always get to choose how we live every day. I choose to be happy because that makes life so much better." The boy's words echoed clearly and powerfully in Blake's mind, as if a sudden light had pierced through his closed heart. Blake sat down beside Thomas, and for the first time he didn't notice the dusty clothes or the boy's poverty-stricken appearance. All he saw was the honesty and extraordinary strength in the boy's bright eyes. The more time Blake spent with Thomas and the other children at the center, the more a deep sense of shame grew within him. He couldn't help but recall the image of Alexis Carter from that day, the simple yet resilient young woman who had stood up to defend her dignity against the insult Blake had caused. Now, Blake realized that what he had once considered right, wise, and classy were actually narrow-minded and prejudiced beliefs, filled with ignorance. One late afternoon, when the center had emptied out, Blake sat silently on the porch, looking out at the small yard where Thomas was happily playing basketball with his friends. He suddenly felt a choking sensation, overwhelmed by the clear realization of the mistakes he had made in the past. Alexis had been insulted and looked down upon simply because of her simple appearance, because of the foolish prejudice he had created. Blake lowered his head, filled with regret and shame, wondering how he had once been able to dismiss others so easily. "Mr. Blake, do you want to play basketball with us?" Thomas suddenly ran over, grabbing his hand with a hopeful look. Blake hesitated for a moment, but then he stood up, smiling softly and following Thomas onto the court. In that moment, for the first time in many years, Blake truly let go of his arrogance and prejudices, immersing himself in the innocence and sincerity of the children he had once ignored. Amidst the laughter of Thomas and his friends, Blake realized a lesson deeper than anything he had ever experienced. Compassion and equality could not be taught through empty words. They were only truly understood when a person opened their heart and experienced them directly. That evening, as Blake left the center, he walked slowly down the quiet street. He took out his phone, hesitated for a long time, then wrote a text message to Alexis Carter. "Alexis, I know it might be too late now, but I truly want to apologize for what happened that day. I was wrong, and I deeply regret the way I treated you." After sending the message, Blake felt an oddly comforting sense of relief, even though he knew this was just the first step in a long journey of self-change. In his heart, the seed of change had sprouted, a seed sown by the strength, sincerity, and optimism of an 8-year-old boy named Thomas. That morning, Blake had just entered the charity center, still feeling unsettled after the message he sent Alexis the night before, when he unexpectedly received a call from Richard Mason. The voice of the dealership owner came through the phone, cautious and filled with worry. "Blake, Marcus Carter just returned to the showroom. He has decided to buy the Lamborghini SVJ Roadster that his daughter inquired about." Blake's heart immediately raced, but the excitement was quickly dampened by Richard's hesitant voice. "But he insists that the person handling the transaction must be Daniel Miller. Mr. Carter made it clear that he only trusts Daniel." Blake froze, a bitter taste rising in his throat. Richard's words were like a sharp blow to his slowly crumbling pride. Blake took a deep breath, his voice trembling as he tried to remain calm. "I understand. I will stay here and continue working." After hanging up, Blake sat in silence. He stared blankly out at the playground, where Thomas and the other kids were playing innocently. The arrogant words, the insulting actions he had directed at Alexis yesterday flooded back to him, causing his heart to ache. He couldn't blame Marcus Carter. It was his own prejudice and arrogance that had cost him that important opportunity. At that same moment, at Boston Luxury Motors, Marcus Carter stood calmly in front of the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster, his gaze sharp yet composed. Daniel Miller stood beside him, nervously hiding his excitement as he spoke with respect. "Mr. Carter, I'm honored that you've entrusted me with this important transaction." Marcus turned to look at Daniel, his expression softening. He spoke gently. "Daniel, I chose you because from the start you were the only one who acted properly, unaffected by petty prejudices that cloud one's integrity. That is the most important quality in business and in life." Daniel felt a surge of strength within him, his voice filled with emotion. "I am truly grateful, sir. I will do my best to live up to your trust." Marcus nodded in satisfaction, but then suddenly scanned the showroom. He asked Daniel softly, "You know, the most unfortunate thing in this story isn't the money or the business opportunity. The most unfortunate thing is that there are people, like Blake Thompson, who have allowed their prejudices to cloud their self-respect and dignity. Daniel paused for a moment before quietly replying, "I think Blake has already started to realize his mistake, sir. He sent a sincere apology to Alexis. I know this because Alexis shared it with me this morning." Marcus seemed slightly surprised, but then he smiled faintly. "If that's the case, then good. I believe everyone deserves a second chance, as long as they're willing to honestly reflect on themselves." Back at the center, Blake sat quietly in the small classroom, for the first time feeling deeply hurt by the consequences of his discriminatory actions. He understood that he hadn't just lost a major contract, but more importantly, he had lost the trust and respect of others. That was the priceless thing that money could never buy. Suddenly, Blake felt someone gently approach him. It was Thomas, the boy with the same innocent smile as always. "Uncle Blake, are you sad about something?" Blake looked deeply into Thomas's eyes and saw true sincerity and concern. He forced a smile, his voice shaky but honest, the first time he'd spoken like this since he arrived. "I'm sad because I just realized I did something very wrong, Thomas. I treated someone terribly just because I thought she wasn't worthy." Thomas paused for a moment, thinking carefully, then gently took Blake's hand, speaking seriously. "But now you know you were wrong. Have you apologized to her yet?" Blake nodded softly. "I just apologized, but I don't know if she'll forgive me." Thomas smiled warmly, speaking with confidence. "My mom always says that when you truly understand where you went wrong and are willing to change, you've already become a better person. I believe she will see that." Blake remained silent, listening to Thomas's words as if they were the most important lesson of his life. It was in this moment that Blake truly understood that Marcus Carter had given him an opportunity. Not the chance to sell an expensive car, but the chance to correct himself, to find the self-respect and sincerity he had lost. Looking out at the playground, Blake's gaze softened. He made a decision not to miss this second chance, the precious opportunity to truly change and become someone he could be proud of. And in that moment, Blake knew that the hardest journey wasn't selling luxury supercars, but finding kindness, humility, and compassion, the qualities he had lost long ago. A month had passed quickly since Blake had come to realize the depth of his mistake. Tonight, the grand lobby of the Bostonian Hotel was more dazzling than ever, with soft golden lighting, elegant floral arrangements, and soothing music welcoming guests to the annual charity gala, hosted by Marcus Carter. This special event was aimed at raising funds for disadvantaged children at the Carter Foundation. Blake Thompson walked into the gala, wearing a luxurious tuxedo, but for the first time, he felt that humility and simplicity were the most important things. He looked around the banquet hall, feeling both nervous and hopeful. Across the room, he spotted Marcus Carter chatting happily with a few important guests. Marcus noticed Blake, giving him an encouraging nod, which made Blake feel a little more at ease. But then, Blake's heart suddenly started racing as a young woman entered the room, Alexis Carter. Alexis wore a simple light blue dress, her hair falling gently over her shoulders, her eyes intelligent and sharp. Her presence immediately attracted the attention of many people, but Alexis just smiled politely, without any show or pretense. Blake took a deep breath, gathering his courage to walk toward Alexis. He realized he couldn't avoid this moment any longer. Alexis saw Blake approaching, a hint of surprise in her eyes, but she quickly regained her composure and politeness. "Hello, Alexis," Blake said softly, his voice sincere and careful. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Alexis paused briefly, studying Blake with a sharp yet gentler gaze than before. Then she nodded. "Yes, of course, Mr. Thompson." Blake hesitated for a moment but quickly regained his calm, looking Alexis straight in the eye with the most serious and honest expression he had ever worn. "I wanted to meet with you today to offer my most sincere apology. What I did to you that day was shameful. I made a grave mistake, and I want you to know that I've thought a lot about my actions over the past few weeks." Alexis listened attentively, not interrupting Blake, her gaze calm yet full of attention. Blake continued, his voice growing more confident and profound with each word. "I used to believe that appearance and status were the most important things, but I was completely wrong. It was Thomas at the Carter Foundation, and it was you, whose self-respect and determination made me realize that the true value of a person isn't in their appearance or wealth." He paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and struggled to hold back the emotion rising inside him. "I am truly sorry, Alexis. I hope you can forgive me, not just through words, but with real change in my actions." Alexis stood in silence for a long moment, as if trying to evaluate the sincerity of this apology. Finally, she spoke softly, her voice sincere but firm. "I can feel the sincerity in your apology, Mr. Thompson. And yes, I forgive you. But what matters most to me now is not the apology, but the lasting change in you." Blake listened intently, a deep sense of gratitude rising in him for Alexis's generosity and maturity. She continued, her voice becoming clearer, as if wanting to make sure Blake understood the importance of what she was about to say. "I believe that everyone deserves a second chance, but that chance only really matters when you prove it through your actions, not just your words. The prejudices and discrimination you once had, you must ensure that you never let them control you again." Blake nodded seriously, his eyes filled with determination. "I understand that, Alexis. I promise you that what happened with you and Thomas will always serve as a strong reminder for me never to make that mistake again." Alexis smiled faintly, the first smile since meeting Blake again, and her eyes softened noticeably. She spoke more quietly now, but with encouragement. "I believe you, Mr. Thompson, and I truly hope you will keep this promise." As Alexis walked away to rejoin the crowd, Blake stood there, feeling lighter yet deep in thought. He understood that Alexis had given him an invaluable gift, the chance to make amends, and more importantly, the opportunity to become a truly better person. From a distance, Marcus Carter watched them, a satisfied smile briefly crossing his lips. He knew he was right to believe in the capacity for change in people, and while tonight's gala would bring in many significant material contributions, for Marcus, the greatest success was the real transformation within Blake Thompson, a person once full of prejudice and arrogance. In the shimmering lights of the gala, Blake realized this was no ordinary event. It was truly a defining moment, where he officially closed the chapter on his past and opened a new one for himself, full of sincerity, humility, and most importantly, compassion. As the gala drew to a close, Marcus Carter quietly made his way to the stage. He stood under the soft spotlight, slowly scanning the room where hundreds of guests, wealthy and powerful, looked at him with admiration and respect. Richard Mason, the owner of Boston Luxury Motors, sat in the front row, his heart racing with nervous anticipation. He knew the important decision Marcus was about to announce would have a profound impact on the future of his dealership. Marcus gently spoke, his voice warm yet commanding. "Before this evening ends, I would like to share something important with all of you. This is not just a story about money, It's a profound lesson about respect and the true value of a person. Richard involuntarily sat up straighter, his heart beating faster. Blake, sitting a few seats away, also listened intently, his face thoughtful, fully aware that Marcus's words were directly related to his actions in the past. Marcus continued, his gaze serious yet full of empathy. As you all know, I recently made a transaction with Boston Luxury Motors, the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster, as a special gift for my daughter, Alexis. However, I also have a bigger plan to replace my company's entire fleet of vehicles, and I have considered Boston Luxury Motors as a potential partner. Richard froze, a chill running down his spine upon hearing this. He had always hoped Marcus would decide to entrust the entire order to his dealership, which could bring in massive revenue and unprecedented prestige. But Marcus gently shook his head, his face slightly stern, his voice clearer and more decisive than ever. However, after the unfortunate events of the past, I have decided to execute only a very small portion of this contract with Boston Luxury Motors. The rest will go to other dealerships, places that truly understand the value of respect and human dignity. The room fell into complete silence. Richard Mason bowed his head, deep regret rising in his chest, each of Marcus's words like a sharp blade, reminding him of the severe consequences of letting prejudice and discrimination influence business decisions. Marcus stared directly at Richard, his voice no longer harsh but sincere and deep. Mr. Mason, I hope you understand the reasoning behind this decision. I am not doing this for revenge, but to send the strongest possible message that, in business and in life, it is unacceptable to disregard someone based on their appearance or skin color. Richard looked up at Marcus, his eyes full of sincerity and remorse, his voice trembling as he spoke. I completely understand, Mr. Carter. I am deeply sorry for what happened at my dealership. I promise you this will be the most profound lesson I've ever received. Marcus nodded gently, his gaze softening slightly. I believe you, and I hope that, from today, Boston Luxury Motors will become a model of positive change, where the true value of a person is always placed above material things. Below the stage, Blake listened intently to every word Marcus spoke, feeling his heart tighten with deep regret. He understood that the consequences of today were the direct result of his past attitude of discrimination and arrogance. Not just he, but Richard, the entire dealership, were now suffering the consequences of a grave mistake. Marcus looked around the entire room, offering a gentle smile, concluding his speech with a powerful and clear message. I hope that everyone here today remembers this. The price of discrimination is not just financial loss, but the loss of trust, respect, and precious opportunities that will never come back. Marcus stepped down from the stage to thunderous applause. Richard Mason sat there, his eyes wet with tears, shame and regret flooding his mind. He knew he had paid a heavy price to truly understand the value of each person. Blake gently placed his hand on Richard's shoulder, his voice soft and sincere. I'm sorry, Richard. This is all my fault. But I promise you I'll never let myself or anyone in the dealership make this mistake again. Richard looked at Blake, nodding slightly, his voice choked but determined. Blake, this is not just a lesson for you, but the biggest lesson of my career. We will change, and we must prove it through clear actions, not just empty words. In the bright lights and soft music of the gala, Richard Mason understood that his dealership would have to embark on a new journey. A journey that would not be easy, but one that was full of meaning, to regain the trust and respect that had been lost. And in that moment, Richard knew that the price of discrimination was far too great, But it was that very pain that would be the strongest motivation for him, Blake, and all of Boston Luxury Motors to truly change forever. From the moment Marcus Carter stepped off the stage with that powerful message, Blake Thompson knew that his life would never be the same again. The days after the gala, Blake returned to Boston Luxury Motors with a completely different mindset. Not as an arrogant, discriminatory sales manager, but as a man who had gained a deep understanding of his true worth and the value of those around him. With strong support from Richard Mason, Blake took on the role of coordinator for the dealership's anti-discrimination training program and employee education. At first, many employees were skeptical or reluctant, but as they saw Blake, who had once been a symbol of arrogance and prejudice, now leading the charge for awareness, they slowly realized that this transformation was serious and profound. Blake frequently shared his personal story, openly discussing his past mistakes in front of all the staff. He emphasized that change must come from a deep understanding of compassion and equality, not just a superficial training program. In addition to his work at the dealership, Blake continued to volunteer regularly at the Carter Foundation, a place that had completely transformed his life and perspective. He grew increasingly close to Thomas, a poor yet optimistic and determined boy, and other children at the center. The sincerity and warmth of the children there gradually made Blake more open, humble, and authentic than ever before. One late afternoon, after a training session at the dealership, Blake stopped by the center to visit Thomas and the other kids. He brought a small gift, a new backpack, and gently handed it to Thomas with a warm smile. "I know you love your old backpack, but I think your mom would be really happy to see you with a new one for school." Thomas looked at the new backpack, his eyes lighting up, and then he immediately ran to hug Blake, whispering with deep emotion, "Thank you, Uncle Blake. But whether it's the new backpack or the old one, I know my mom is really happy that I have such a good friend like you." In that moment, Blake's heart was deeply moved. He knew that he had truly changed. He had found his greatest joy not in money or status, but in the genuine affection from a poor boy who had unwittingly become the greatest teacher in his life. In the days that followed, Richard Mason witnessed a noticeable change at the dealership. No longer was there any sign of discriminatory attitudes. Employees became more enthusiastic and attentive to all customers, no matter who they were. This not only improved the dealership's image, but also created a positive work atmosphere full of trust and mutual respect. One day, as Blake was about to leave after work, he unexpectedly ran into Marcus Carter standing silently in front of the showroom, his eyes filled with thought. Marcus gently spoke when he saw Blake approaching. "Blake, I came here today because I wanted to see the change everyone's been talking about for myself." Blake smiled humbly, sincerely replying, "It's all thanks to the profound lesson you gave me the opportunity to learn. I wouldn't say I've completely changed, but I do know the person I want to become from now on." Marcus nodded slightly, his voice full of respect and encouragement. "I believe in your change, Blake. Never forget that our true value is measured by how we treat others when no one important is watching." Blake nodded silently, Marcus' words embedding themselves deeply in his mind. As time went on, Blake continued to live with kindness and humility, becoming a close friend and trusted mentor to Thomas and the other kids at the center. His transformation inspired everyone around him, turning Boston Luxury Motors from a place once full of prejudice and discrimination into a space that welcomed every customer with genuine respect. On a golden, gentle afternoon, Blake stood on the balcony of the dealership, looking down at the showroom bustling with customers of every race and background. He felt more at peace than ever before. It was in that moment that Blake deeply understood that the true value of life lies not in wealth or status, but in how we treat each other with respect and genuine affection. From a distance, Thomas ran up, waving at him with a bright, shining smile. Blake waved back, his heart overflowing with simple yet profound happiness. Blake Thompson's story, from a man once full of discrimination and arrogance to one now filled with inspiration, humility, and humanity, became a powerful lesson that never judge the worth of a person based on their appearance, background, or skin color. True wealth and success lie in humility, compassion, and the way we treat one another when we think no one important is watching. Everyone has the opportunity to make amends. What matters most is learning and growing from our mistakes. And in that moment, Blake knew that he had found the true meaning of life, a meaning that would forever guide him on his journey of kindness and goodness. You see, sometimes we judge others based on their appearance or skin color without realizing that a person's true worth lies in how they treat those around them. Blake Thompson's journey of change shows us the incredible power of humility, compassion, and the ability to learn from our own mistakes. What about you? Have you ever mistakenly judged someone based on their appearance? Share your story or thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful and inspiring, please like the video, share it to spread this positive message, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next touching, insightful stories. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in the next stories.